don't get to talk about it on my channel, but I do have a big appreciation for the way that the internet age has reshaped the way that we as listeners consume and distribute music, as well as the way that artists gain exposure and can self-promote. I think there are a ton of factors which will be discussed in this video, but I do have to ask, is social media ruining music? That is the topic of the new video from YouTube-based music critic John from ARTV. He also invites a circle of numerous other YouTube music discussers like Nate Is Lame, Olivia Arena, Spectrum Pulse, Rocked, and more. This is a really interesting video, but not for the reasons you might expect. This is a topic that fascinates me, and this actually is a video that continues on from another video of ARTV's, Quality Over Quantity, A Lost Art. However, this video focuses more on the social media aspect of things, whether it is a benefit or a deficiency to the way that we consume music nowadays. Now, as a response to this video, I do want to make it very clear, I am absolutely not inviting any sort of personal attacks on any of the people featured in this video, merely a response to the points that John and co make. If you are the sort of person that goes after videos that are the topic of response videos like this and targets them with harassment and threats as opposed to any sort of criticism or response, then please stop. That's absolutely serious. It should be obvious, but there are people out there that do it, and I absolutely do not encourage any sort of behavior like that. That said, we're going to get into the response video right about now.
You might find that it's actually quite hard to pay attention to doing one thing when you're constantly flipping around between about 20 different things. If you're attempting to listen to a new album from your favorite artist, and in the process, you're also scrolling through Instagram, texting 3 different people, and maybe even attempting to do other things in the background, perhaps editing photos, playing a game, and...
You gotta love this condescending description of social media consumption. I switch between apps all the time, and I'm still in the green. I still got things in the real world I have to do eventually. I don't literally live in the Habbo Hotel.
The fact is that music often takes a back seat in the age of social media. Even 10 years ago, I think that things, including a lot of distractions, weren't as prevalent. The fact holds true that we weren't as distracted back then, so we could actually focus in on maybe the art form that is the album.
I think what John's trying to get at first off is the idea that we're so distracted by the abundance of things that we can do in the internet age that we actually lose focus of like genuinely paying attention to the music. I'd agree that we absolutely have more things to be distracted by, with our lives being so indebted to the internet now. One look at my laptop screen will actually tell you that. However, if the idea presented here is that this leads us to being incapable of actually appreciating and absorbing music in its full detail now, then I have a suggestion to make. Listening to music in the background while you do other things is 2 things. 1, an actual use for music, and 2, not a new thing. You can get more appreciation out of music if you focus on it, yes, which is considered the ideal way of absorbing music because you're actually paying attention to what the artist is saying. But it's not like people don't do that anymore, and even before the 21st century, you'd reckon that people would throw a record on their turntable and let it play out while they did something like homework or chores. Social media or using any digital device,
their phones, their iPads, their devices of some sort,
as you mentioned, is just another of those tasks that people do while listening to music, and not actually a reason that music or consumption of music has been somewhat devalued. It's just another context in which we'll use music for one of its practical purposes. There's also this strange implication that John makes that we've somehow lost the ability to do focused listens nowadays.
We actually took the time out to listen to music. We weren't doing 20 other things in the process. So in this new age where everybody is distracted or addicted, I think would be the better term.
Ooh, scary. As if we can't do that now because we have so many more distractions in the internet age, which by the way is quite wrong. People who want to appreciate the music for what it is during a focused listen can still do that if they want. And even if you did get somehow distracted during your listen, we're actually living in a time now where you can just go back and replay what you listened to. You can go back to a previous track. The idea that we should focus only on the negative aspect of development while ignoring anything else that might cancel it out is not only disingenuous to the discussion about music consumption nowadays, it's also kind of disrespectful to the platform that a lot of our society is based upon now. But I'll get onto that one much later.
I think that the artist has to try harder, or is forced to try harder, I would say, to actually put themselves out there and give some sort of unique angle, and it puts maybe their presence and personality over the music itself. People did have an image, they always had a look, and there was always some sort of style, but I would say now more than ever, it's almost about the style over the substance, and that trickles into the music video as well.
I would agree nowadays that a lot of music promotion is based on image. If your public image as an artist carries a lot of weight or a lot of fuel for discussion, usually outside the music, maybe you've been involved in a drama or a particular incident, a controversy, then more people do talk about you and perhaps even listen to your music as a result. I know a lot of people who listen to Boot Gang's music just because he's like a total asshole. And this does actually help you to stick out in the crowd. Image can affect music, whether it is negative or positive attention. Even if this is not new. Maybe on an exposure level, artists are definitely driven to find ways to stand out in the larger pool of other artists who are also trying to stand out. Finding new means of self-promotion. Image is definitely a part of that, especially if you are a particularly controversial artist. Outrage marketing is definitely still a thing. That would be an interesting path to go down in terms of the discussion, especially considering that despite the fact that you can put yourself on a platform very accessibly nowadays without as strict a quality control to worry about, actually being able to earn the exposure that would gain you even the nichest followings or the ability to make a living off your music isn't very easy when there are a ton of others out there trying to make the same waves and a lot of artists that are dominating the top of the hierarchy. This is a really good point that John does not make. His approach to this idea is a little bit different.
If you think back to the music videos of the decade of the 2000s, you can see that they weren't necessarily taking themselves all that seriously. They were often more fun and more lighthearted, and now everything is so self-serious, and it's a new era.
Okay, now this might be the most baffling point to me. I was baffled by it during my first watch, and it's baffling to me even just watching it now. I don't actually know where to start. So what I've actually done is I've written the whole thing out, and I'm going to read from it. So if you notice my eye contact not being as, connected to the camera, that's why. If your perception of music videos prior to the social media age is that most of them weren't taking themselves too seriously, or that they were made to be fun representations of the songs and the band and all of that, and that not many, if any of them, were focused on a specific serious narrative for the artist, or that they didn't function like short films back then you clearly weren't looking at all. There are a ton of music videos that are almost like short pieces of cinema. Back then or now, there are a ton of music videos that are almost like short pieces of cinema, as well as those that are fun. And amazingly, nearly nothing has changed. I say nearly for the sake of damage control. Secondly, let's say that there was a newfound movement of artists taking themselves and the presentation of themselves a little more seriously, especially in the forms of music videos, which is an oddly specific thing to be lingering on, but let's go with it. Why is this even a problem? Music videos allow for more creative expression and promotion, no matter how seriously the artist is taking their image. You can perceive taking yourself seriously as actually displaying your dedication to what you are doing. But whether they're being fun or being seriously cinematic, whatever John is trying to get at here, there's still art that represents the artist. And to almost contradict that a little bit, music videos progressing to become more than just an accompanying video for a song, and more like a statement for the artist's overall image and what they stand for, is actually a demonstration of good. Some artists actually gained a buzz because of viral music videos. Yonkers, Here It Goes Again, video games. But more importantly, this is not relevant. What does this have to do with the rise of social media?
And everybody has to have something to sell you on in order to get you hooked. It's not just the artist. You have to get to know them as a person and be invested in something or a fandom to actually be a part of their music and their trajectory and their career and their takeoff and everything like that.
I feel like this is a very sketchy generalization based on the way in which specific fandoms operate. The behavior of certain fandoms is definitely a consequence of social media, and that many users can group with others that share interest of a particular artist that they're fond of, and which obsessive gatekeeping a hive mind behavior can germinate, like the fan base of Aliararia Grandele, for example. But that's not the point that John is attempting to make here. Rather, he seems to steer towards the idea that the artist's concern with their own image is some sort of invitation to be invested in their personal life, their story, their come up, all of that. I don't think that is necessarily a case of which social media has ruined artistry. I mean this as if to say that the attention we invest into artists' personal stories is on a case-by-case basis. Some high-profile artists artists keep their lives relatively under wraps, while others are very open about it in their music, and the responses from fans will vary depending on which. I'd rather keep it simple and say that such a point is far too big a generalization to make as a statement about music nowadays across the board.
I think that music videos now look at themselves as being a short film and directed by Colin Tilley and all of the lighting and all of the black bars so it's cropped so you think it's cinematic and you're almost watching a short film.
Again, this is not a problem, and to be honest, I don't even think it's that relevant. The idea here is that the music videos somewhat deviate from the actual music, when in fact they don't. You're still consuming the music, just in a different form. And music videos have always been used in this manner. It's not a new thing that's just risen up with the rise of social media, regardless of how serious you think artists are taking themselves now. Even as promotional material for the artist's work, this has always been a form of which music videos have been used. Again, I don't even know why I'm entertaining this point, but it just seems like something that John is lingering on for far too long. Not only have music videos progressed as an art form, but that progression is also really good, which I think is what John is trying to get at here, but he doesn't seem to make it very clear.
It's interesting to see how we've either progressed or else digressed. It's one of two things, and in some ways I feel like we've definitely progressed, and it's easier to get music, you can make things a lot easier.
What? Those are almost like two completely new points, and they're so vague. I actually have no clue if John is attempting to carry on from his previous point, or just starting new ones. Either way, it's as clear as a brick wall.
But we also, I feel, rely a little bit too heavily on algorithms.
Huh?
On the lack of the human touch.
Huh?
I feel like we're kind of losing the touch of humanity that says, I'm just going to make whatever I make and there's not going to be a trend or a market or something else involved telling me exactly what to make and when to put it out because that's the best time to do so.
There are two sides of this really distorted coin. The music industry has always pushed artists towards following trends. This is not a subset of social media and it never will be. Two, I think it's a huge oversight here because there are still a ton of people working on their own terms. This relates to one of the biggest oversights that John makes in this video that I'll sort of conclude the video with after I respond to it. But the fact is that if anything, social media has opened the gates for people to work on their own music without the worry for any sort of management getting in the way of what you're doing. You can upload whatever you want on your own terms and find a following from there. There are so many artists that have managed to pick up an audience as a result of the freedom that is granted to us by how vast and eager the world of the internet is now, and how easily you can promote yourself as well. But is it now obvious that trend surfing is actually no longer as big an issue in the musical landscape? Maybe in the mainstream you hear ideas being borrowed and even recycled to the point where it might be perceived as tiring, like the saturation of trap music, some of the notable tropes you hear in EDM music, the resurgence in Afro styles like dancehall, and Latin styles like reggaeton. But is it becoming clear from naming those trends that that itself actually is a pretty diverse set of ideas for what is often viewed as a streamlined output? And the great thing about now in this age of social media is that if you don't like what you're hearing on the radio or the charts, granted that you're listening to it in the first place, you can avoid it altogether and listen to what you want on your own terms. The idea that social media has narrowed any sense of possibility is baffling to me.
I have to force myself so many times to just set my phone down outside of my studio and say, you know what, I'm not going to be distracted today, so here we go. I almost feel embarrassed to share that because I, as somebody who reviews music, who is a huge music fan and talks about it, counts it down, ranks it, however you want to look at it. I talk about music. I should be honed in on this, but it's so hard to focus when there are so many other things that people want you to check. And these sites are just as guilty. They want you to check your metrics on YouTube. They want you to see, oh, what is your most played song here? What are you doing over here?
You don't have to focus on it if you don't want to. They are there. But you can focus on only the music if you want. Granted that they are there to use and that a lot of people use them, more of these resources being available is a good thing. I think it's really cynical to look at this as being a distraction. I like that people can check what an artist's most popular song is. It might be an arbitrary piece of information, but if people are curious about it and it's there, why not check it out? And if you can't keep up with it all, there's no reason why you can't not frame your consumption of the music around that. And there's also no reason why you can't not judge others for being curious about that sort of stuff in the first place. Anyways, this video, of course, isn't just displaying the perspective of John. It also displays the perspectives of people who have suspiciously similar perspectives to John.
I won't deny that it can be very much distracting to see the increased flow of information that's coming at you non-stop. But I guess for me, like anything else, it's a a tool primarily.
Mark from Spectrum Pulse's very brief segment here actually gains a fair bit of respect from me, as he seems to acknowledge both the distraction aspects of social media, but also hints at the idea that it's not a gigantic negative blow to music consumption either, even if it isn't really explored in that much depth here.
Understanding that there is a distance reinforced by the technology that does enable a certain amount of separation, at least for me. In other words, I don't tend to consider social media the same devil that a lot of people do. A distraction, sure. An addictive distraction, almost absolutely. But hey, if you can set it aside at the right points, go out for a hard run, turn up the tunes, that can be worthwhile.
Just from the strictly physical sense of how you would use it throughout your day, I mean, it is just very distracting. A lot of being able to enjoy music is being present and being in the moment. So, if you're on your phone, if you're distracted, if you're reading, you're not paying attention to the music.
I actually forgot I addressed that point earlier in the video. It feels like it's been a long time. Anyways, listening to music in the background while you're doing things is a valid way of listening to music, yada yada yada.
There is something absolutely freeing and almost meditative to be able to just kind of let your brain go and just kind of empty yourself. Hearing about all of the hubbub from everyone about these new albums that are coming out, it's just like it almost builds up too much anticipation to the point where it becomes very easy to become disappointed with new releases.
It's a very unusual point for me to address this one, not because it's necessarily incorrect, but it's just an unexpected viewpoint on this subject of hype. I've certainly hyped up a lot of music and witnessed the excitement for particular releases, and I suppose if that's all you hear about something, your hopes can be dashed a lot easier. This issue seems like something that can be easily overcome by simply not participating or paying attention to this, or acknowledging that going into a project with a fresh mind is the best means of going about it. I actually think it's a great thing that there are dedicated fan bases to this that can collectively build up hype for a project. It spreads word of them. It's not only a positive for the artist, but it's a positive of potential listeners that might actually take a liking to that music. I feel like twisting a point like this into a negative is a result of the inherent viewpoint of social media as this thing that we have to avoid, when actually I think it's something that we should embrace and adapt to because it is becoming such a big part of our lives right now.
I think everyone can pretty much agree that social media as a whole is toxic. As being a music influencer, it puts a lot of weight on my shoulders to give the people what they want. When a new song is being released, obviously there's different time zones. Some people are able to hear that song before I'm able to, and seeing what they have to say about it usually warps my opinion on the song because I think I have to have this standard to please my audience.
Toxic behavior absolutely exists as a consequence of the freedom provided by the internet. I actually empathize hugely with those who encounter harassment and threats and derogatory behavior simply for the sake of expressing an opinion on something as arbitrary as music or art. Of course, I don't mean that music or art is arbitrary. I meant to say that, relatively speaking, sharing your opinion on the art or music, that's what's arbitrary, and not worth any of the elitism or the abuse that tends to follow. It's very different to a commenter or a person in a fandom criticizing you or disagreeing with what you said.
Crap. Stay off social media if there's a song coming out, don't let other people's opinions deter your own, and always stay true to yourself.
Social media has helped me find new music as soon as it comes out, so that's one of the huge benefits for it, because I don't get press releases from every single band as soon as they push something new. However, with social media, people tag it, people post it, reshare it, and that helps me find it really quickly. So that's probably one of the best benefits I've had while reviewing and finding music because of social media. On the opposite side of that, you see all the hate and negativity sometimes when new music comes out. Whether it's a change or something that's not as good as something previous, you hear a lot of hate. You see a lot of just gross comments, but people are going to be like that in every way, in every form of life. You just have to learn how to tune it out.
Rocked actually makes a decent point here. I won't linger on that one too long.
Basically, bands are marketing themselves now as Hot Topic merch fuel since nobody's making money from streaming anymore. Every cent comes in from merchandising and touring, so bands need to build a strong sense of loyalty with their fans.
Good!
Kids are the easiest to manipulate, so they're the prime demographic. Basically, that means that bands are dumbing down their music now and consequently hurting alternative music as a whole.
No!
I am not a fan of how deeply entwined social media is with music. Please subscribe to my channel, or else your cat will get kidney failure. Thanks for having me on the show.
John, mate, who are you getting on board for these things? That was probably the most pointless contribution yet.
Thanks for asking me the question that you asked. I would say that the effect social media has on me as a music listener is that I have to be a whole lot more self self-aware. When you're part of a community of other people talking about it, and then you see other communities who disagree with you or really agree with you or something, you're constantly having to say like, okay, who am I? Who are my people? How am I supposed to think about it? What's the vocabulary, the way I'm supposed to speak about these songs? You're constantly comparing your musical taste and your perception of songs to how other people enjoy them.
Again, the behavioral aspect of music consumption on social media, a phrase that I'm honestly getting tired of saying now, so I'm just going to call it micosm. The way to go about removing this concern seems to be perhaps by encouraging people to be more inviting and tolerant of music discussion and other musical opinions that might not match your own, and also encouraging listeners and consumers to not worry about what others will make of their opinion. I could unpack that more, but that's just the gist of what I'll say regarding that.
It's tough to create content and at the same time follow along with what everyone else is doing. It's definitely easier to keep up with content, with what's going on socially, but it's also really difficult to keep up with everyone and to follow along with feedback.
To be honest, I've thought about it and I actually have no problem with what Brad is saying here. He seems to be voicing his opinion from the perspective of a content creator, and as someone who does basically the same thing as he does, I feel the same experiences, keeping it balanced with creating content as well as listening to new music. It's basically one perspective with the experience of using social media as a means of consuming music, as opposed to anything outright critical of it. In evaluating every perspective shown in this video, I did notice a bit of a pattern. While every perspective came from a place of personal experience, I did notice that most seem to view social media in an inherently negative light. It seems to be the case that social media is consistently viewed as this negative detriment to our listening experience in the modern day, as opposed to something that we should embrace because it is such a big part of our lives right now, as well as a big way in which music is now distributed and shared and discussed. I personally find it a bit of a shame that this video featured so many voices and perspectives that could have provided some insight on the role of social media in the way we listen to music now, and most of them were negative. With the exception of Rocked and maybe Spectrum Pulse a little bit, I don't think there was much of a discussion about the way that social media positively impacts our listening experiences. And if you're discussing a topic like this that could be easily disagreeable, I feel like presenting a one-sided argument is doing the discussion a whole lot of injustice, if not an irresponsible means of sharing this with an impressionable audience.
Do you find yourself having a hard time separating your time between Instagram and actually just listening to the music?
No. Now, I've talked a lot in response to what John says in the video, but what about what he doesn't say in the video? This video very much surrounds the base idea of micosm, but it seems to focus mainly on negative. You're a music critic, and I'm not talking to just John, I'm talking to everyone who participates in this sort of discussion. You are a person who talks about music in the internet age. The likelihood is you discovered a lot of music through the internet, and especially if you are the sort of person that doesn't particularly like what a lot of music circles will talk about, maybe like mainstream artists. I get that, you know. Not everyone wants to talk about Drake, so maybe you branch off and you look through sites like Bandcamp and SoundCloud to find other projects that are lesser known but stuff that you want to promote. And I think that this is the biggest oversight in John's video, the fact that social media platforms, not just Facebook and Twitter, the stuff that you usually think of, but sites like Rate Your Music and discussion forums which you use to talk about music and all of that, and especially YouTube, which I'm using right now to discuss this very topic. These are platforms you use to discover new music. How did a lot more people in the internet age find out about bands like Daughters and Fishmans and Swans? How were certain artists able to find virality and their own niche audiences and build off of that and actually have a huge cultural impact and a huge influence on modern music? When you think about social media being used as a platform for promotion and sharing, both as an artist trying to spread the word of their music, but also a listener that is trying to spread word of music, and a critic giving acclaim to a piece of music that they are really enjoying, to completely ignore that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, shows an extremely biased viewpoint in tackling this topic of micosm. Not only that, but music critics nowadays use social media platforms to share their opinions. Some, like John and the others mentioned in this video, have actually built a career and make a living off these platforms. And I understand the importance of being critical of your own spaces, but there might be a complete lack of self-awareness and the prospect of posing the suggestion that social media is ruining music, when it's probably the reason that a lot of people were able to listen to their favorite music in the first place. As an influencer especially, as I said before, you have the power to direct people towards music that you believe is the most worthwhile in this saturated era of music consumption, instead of spending energy talking smack about the entire platform that your career is built on. And I mean this with no invitation to start personal animosity, but the video's lack of thought or research put into it, or even variance in perspective, leaves a lot of the discussion that was posed here completely unproductive and seeming more like a reason to have a circle of YouTubers promoted in one brief medium. Again, that's not a personal attack to anyone in this video, especially John. It's more a baffled reaction to how little insight you can actually get in response to such a prevalent and insightful topic. Social media is not a scapegoat for narrow-mindedness or ignorance. I definitely have a very clear opinion on the matter, and I would invite any discussion that might oppose this idea. Social media isn't an obstacle against music consumption, it's just something that it's adapted to.